Hello, my beautiful people. Hola, mi gente bella. I'm so excited today. I know it's been a minute. I think it's been like a week or two since I've had an episode because it's been very busy in this side of my life, life. But I'm very excited today to invite someone who I was introduced online. Then she was in a class. We've connected. Please open your arms, your heart, your love for Dulce Orozco. Hola, Dulce.
Hola, Vanessa. Thank you so much for inviting me. I was looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm so excited to share your journey, to really get to know you more and the work that you're doing in the world. So, as you all know, I always love to read the bio before we get into it. I'll have all of the links, her long bio, all the information, so you can follow her, so you can work with her if you want to. But for now, I'm going to read the shorter bio. Assisting people of color and from immigrant families ready to improve their relationship with themselves, to see new perspectives so they can create new realities honoring their magic and uniqueness. Dulce Orozco is a Latin immigrant therapist and speaker. She is a licensed mental health counselor in Massachusetts. Dulce's why is love. She wants her daughters and everyone she works with and everyone on earth to spend more time living in love rather than in fear. I love that so much. Dulce,
Thank you.
one of the things we were talking about before we got on was that, I noticed that you have Latina immigrant therapist, right? That is your title, that is your name. And there's, many people who are Latina immigrant therapists, but you chose to lead with it. And I wanted to ask you why this is so important that you claim that Latina immigrant part of yourself and to hear more of your story.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. You know, I feel that, and I know I'm not the only one, and I used to be ashamed of this, but I feel it's important to talk about that. I started my private practice not treated as a small business, right? So for the good 5 years of my work in private practice, I didn't register my business. So it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I registered my business and I needed a name. So I was like, okay, what's going to be the name of my name that is not Dulce Orozco? And I thought that a easier way for people to knew more about myself was with that, right? Latina, immigrant. The Latina part is a big part of my identity to the point where I was born and raised in Venezuela and I came here when I was 17, so I was very young. But I feel that now I always gonna be Venezuelan, right? And I'm always gonna feel Venezuelan, but I feel that the Latina part has taken over because after being here for most of my life, I've seen how similar we are and how many things in common we share. So I do feel that the my identity as a Latina is a big part of my life, especially after becoming a mom, because it's something that I want to teach my daughters. And the immigrant part, it's also always going to be there, right? So I thought it was hopefully a quick way for people to identify a couple of things about myself. And also in the process of looking for a therapist, as you know, there's so much stigma and taboo within the Latinx community, that it is better, but I don't think it's where we would want it to be. So that's the story of the name.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wanted to know a little more about like the stigma you've come up with. For me, para mí, like I remember asking for therapy when I was in high school. My parents were dysfunctional, they fought a lot, and I was the oldest sister taking care of everyone. And my mom, her English was never very good enough to help with school. My dad's either, but he had a business. And so I had no family members to ever help me with schoolwork. I became the one who helped my siblings. And I used to speak like this a lot until I was about 7 or 8 and I was bullied. But as I got older, I said to myself, like, let's read about therapy. And then I said, I need therapy. And my parents were like, ¿Para qué? ¿Quieres pagar a un oído que te escuche? You want to pay for some ear to listen to you? Like, I know that in the end they did believe in therapy before they passed, but I also think they didn't want anybody to hear the stuff that was going on in the
Mm,
family, right?
yeah. So
So, what are some of
secrets.
the things you found? Because I finally did get to therapy in my 20s, right? And did some really good work there and have done work like throughout my life. I love EMDR, I love hypnosis. I definitely believe in asking my therapist to actually use the tools because I found that some therapists sit and talk to you sometimes for many, many years. And that's how people find me because then they want to expedite. So I had got therapists where I was like, please, please use the tools that I saw on your list. Please use the EMDR, please use the hypnosis, or please use whatever you're using or energy
Hmm.
tool. What have you seen either for yourself or for your clients where there is this fear or there is this stigma? Like, how would you express it? I just expressed it my way where they're like, you're not crazy and you just want to pay somebody to listen to you. Like, that was the energy I got. What do you hear? What have you dealt with?
Yeah. So growing up in Venezuela, I'm 41. So growing up in Venezuela, I didn't hear of there. Like therapy wasn't a thing, right? I had two people very close to me that tried suicide, and one died by suicide. But it was almost like after that I started to hear more about therapy. And therapy at that point was a psychiatrist, medication. That was it, right? It's not the type of therapy that you and I are talking about now. So it wasn't until, but the interesting thing is that even though that was the case, I wanted to be a psychologist, right? It's like I was always Vanessa in a group of 20 people, right? The one that the random person came to and started telling the whole life story. So even though therapy wasn't a thing that I knew or that was part of my life, I wanted to be a psychologist. And interestingly enough, my parents told me therapy was not offered in my hometown as a major, and they didn't want me to move. So they were like, why don't you like study something else? And life is interesting. And I ended up not only in a different city, but in a different country. So yeah, I feel that I've always had that inclination of what if we can, create a space where people can feel heard and seen and connected, because ultimately that's what happens when you have a good therapy, right? When the therapist is doing their job, it's that connection and feeling seen and feeling validated and feeling heard, and the healing comes through that. At least that's how it feels to me.
Mhm.
But some of the main fears I've seen, definitely so I'm gonna divide them into two categories, and I know it's much, much, much more complex than this, but for the purpose of this conversation, I feel that there's this I've worked with people that um are not supported by their families, right? Or that it's really hard for them to accept that they need therapy because of all the taboos. You're not crazy. You don't need someone else. What are people gonna think of you? Like all these things, right? Yeah, yeah. What are you going to do telling somebody else your secrets? Medication is faster in many cases too. So I feel that there's this group of people that don't have the support or don't look at therapy as something that can be helpful because all the stigma that they've heard from their families, from society, and so on. And I've noticed, Vanessa, that there's also a different kind of fear, which is um, coming from this group of people that are pro therapy, right?
Yeah.
They have nothing against therapy, but it's hard for them to ask for help because they should have figured out by themselves. They're so good at everything else, right?
Yes.
And I've noticed this specifically when it comes to Latinx women, overachievers, leaders, women that take care of everything in their life and everyone in their life. So it's like, why I'm not able to take care of this part of myself, right? Which can be frustrating and can be at times the barrier for them to look for therapy. It's not because they don't believe in it, and they might not have that stigma of, oh, it's just for crazy people, but it might feel like something they should have figured out by themselves. Does that make sense, Vanessa?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, I'm an overachiever. There were my parents fighting all night, and I slept 2 hours, and I got up and got an A.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? I got an
yeah,
A.
with very little effort or no effort at all.
But I think that the spiritual part of my life made me open to that personally, but I did question myself that way as a young person. But also the spiritual part was like, no, we all need help. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And we can't know everything. We can't know everything. We can't know everything. We're not meant to figure it all out, but absolutely makes sense. And even like clients who come to me, they're like, why haven't I figured this out? Or I have it under control. So I'm so glad that you brought that up because the more achieving that you are, the more overachieving you are, the more together you are in the world, the more you've achieved in the world, probably there's an inner child somewhere suffering really hard.
Yes. Yeah, that needs that container, right? Or that needs that space. So, and I feel that lately, that's the group I'm working with the most. Um, yeah.
I love that. And how did you come onto your own therapy journey? Like, were you open to it, or I know you said you didn't know about it when you were young, but were you open to it? Did it take like a difficult thing to bring you to it, or did it just make you realize, like, I just want to do this?
Yeah. So, the first time I went to therapy, it was in my mid 20s. Um, and I knew, but I feel that that was the first time that I officially had a therapist.
Right.
Before then, I can recognize, for example, at school, I had this professor. He was amazing, and psychology was my major. This was in undergrad, right? So, very often I talked to him like during office hours. And I think those were therapy sessions, right? Like it was, we didn't call it then. He never told me about the counseling center at school. I don't even think I knew about a counseling center. And another part of it, right? Like as an international student, um I didn't know about so many things. Like I was like almost like navigating this world kind of like blindsided, right? Or like it was like a trial and error type of thing. So some of the resources that were definitely there, I don't think I completely got to take advantage of because I didn't know how to use them. So thinking about that professor, I do think that he was like a mentor dash therapist dash professor that knew many things about myself and as someone that I felt extremely comfortable with. But the first time that I officially had a therapist was in my mid 20s. I don't think it was anything huge, right? Like I feel it was like kind of like this transition in my life where I was dating my current husband, and it was my first time in a like real relationship, and I was kind of like discovering things. At the same time, things in Venezuela started to get very ugly. And I feel I needed a safe space to process everything. So I knew I wanted to work with someone that was Latinx. Like for me, that cultural piece was key.
Hmm.
At the time, I was already working as a therapist myself, or I was in that journey. And it's interesting, Vanessa, because you and I know that when you are in these spaces, no workplace can require you to have therapy, right? That they cannot require you that. And at
Hmm.
the same time, it's so helpful for any therapist from any type of healing modality to have their own um, outlet, right? Their own therapy, their
I think
own.
some universities require for you to have therapeutic hours.
Okay,
Some
okay.
programs, some
When
programs
when you like
when you're in training.
okay, when in your training,
But
yeah,
when
like
you're working, wow. Yeah.
that was not my case. And
Right.
even when, and I'm talking more like mostly like working, right? So I was
Right.
like
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
in the field, and I
Yeah.
understand why they can, but at the same time it's so helpful. So I knew I wanted a Latina therapist. I was extremely lucky to find one person I worked with for a long time. Um, in between that, because of insurance changes and COVID and whatnot, I did work with two white therapists, and I noticed how different it was, the dynamic, right? And I'm not saying that that I don't know, that it's better to, if you're a Latinx, you need to work with a Latinx therapist. That's not what I'm saying what forever. But for me, I do think I'm one of those people that the cultural piece is so important that it's easier, right, to work with not any Latinx therapist, but the right Latinx therapist. So it got to a point though, even though I worked with this therapist for over a decade, it got to a point where I did not feel understood and seen, and I started to feel judged by her, right? So that's when it was not easy, but I realized that I needed a change. I was not the same person I was when I started working with her almost like 14 plus years ago, right? Which is a big part of therapy as well. When can you say this served me so much, but I need to move on from a client perspective and also from a therapist perspective?
Yeah, that is so important. I'm so glad that you shared that. It's really, really important. And it just reminded me of a time when I had to do that too. When I first started therapy, I was in my 20s and I wanted to find a Latinx therapist. I didn't at the time.
Yeah.
Wound up finding somebody that was in my old neighborhood where I grew up. So that
Mm.
was interesting. Living in Manhattan and having to come back into Queens where I grew up. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going back to therapy where in my old neighborhood. And for me, Latinx was very important at the time, but in my 20s, since I was already a psychic medium, like I also needed a spiritual therapist.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between a spiritual therapist, because you could be Christian and spiritual, you could be Muslim and spiritual, you could be Jewish and spiritual. I needed a therapist that knew about alternative healing, and this is over 25 years ago. So I couldn't find a Latinx or at the time Hispanic therapist that, we call them then, that had that. Now all the therapists are like, I'm spiritual, I'm a bruja, I'm this, people are waking up in different ways. But back then, no. And so I was like, I would go to a Latina therapist who would be scared because I needed a therapist who wouldn't think that the phenomenon I was experiencing was schizophrenia, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I hear information that can be
Yeah.
proven to be correct that I don't know the person. So I wound up getting a white one who understood all that phenomenon. So for a while, but then, eventually I left her, but she knew and she understood. So
And
it was
that's
very
so
helpful.
important. So what happened to me, the therapist I'm telling you about was extremely academic. And when
Mm,
I started sharing more about this spiritual journey and what was happening, I really did not feel supported. If anything, I felt criticized and I felt judged, and that the safe space that therapy was for me, that ended, right? Because I felt that I couldn't. continue sharing this huge part of myself that I was trying to understand with her. Absolutely, it's so important to find the right person, whether it's Latinx, whether it's, you know, whatever it is, but
Yeah.
is it the right person for you at that time? Because that can also change, like we were talking about.
Yes. I love
Um,
that you brought all this up. Yes. And and I want to share, like, I actually found a Latinx therapist a couple of years ago, and we got on Zoom. And when I started to tell her how it affected me to be living in central Pennsylvania and its lack of diversity,
mm.
she looked at me. I think she was Colombian American. And she's like, "You're pretty light. You don't have a problem." And I'm like, well, it has nothing to do, although I don't look like white people in central Pennsylvania, just so you know. They're from German, Dutch stock. They're mostly blue-eyed blondes, right? And different facial features, right?
But even if you did, Vanessa,
Oh,
even
no, no, I
yeah,
know because it's an internal thing, but I'm just giving you another
yeah,
layer,
yeah, yeah, like the yeah.
which is, well, I'm not getting killed because
Oh,
I'm black, right? I'm not getting killed because, I mean, like, no one's after me, like, because of that. At the same time, I mean, you, like you said, even if I did, even if I was blonde and blue-eyed, but I had grown up in a diverse environment and I didn't feel right, that's valid. But the truth is that her general statement was
yeah,
really her projection of her own and her Hispanic views and her maybe internal colorism or whatever, that I just never went back. I was like, wow, I worked so hard to find a Latina therapist. And then she sits there and just looks at me and is like, well, you don't have an issue. You're light. What's the problem? And I'm like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the internal. Like, this is what I grew up with. I grew up with everybody in New York. I grew up walking. I grew up eating everything. I dated, do you know, I'm not even married to a Latino. I'm married to a Turkish Kurdish man. I've dated half of the UN because I've dated a lot. I only married my husband 3 years ago. I've had relationships with people from all over the world and countries, like that I met in New York.
yeah,
And I've been
yeah,
into different cultures because of it, you know? South African culture, West African culture, Jamaican culture, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, you know what I mean? Polish, German, like American who doesn't have their roots anymore. So it's so interesting. You can't have a therapist who just judges you on what you look like
yeah.
from their
And the fact that
perspective.
it happens, right? Because in a way, and I've seen this, and I know it's like I'm gonna give you a very random example, but so I have two daughters. They started classes last year, and they're in first and third grade. My first, so the teacher of my youngest daughter, the ones that is going to first grade, is the same teacher that my oldest daughter had, and she's amazing. It's like the coolest first grade teacher ever. And I was remembering, Vanessa, my first grade teacher was this lady. Like she looked so intimidating. She was like teaching first grade forever. She was my uncle's first grade teacher, you know, but it was almost like the antithesis of the first grade teacher that you think of in cartoons, right? To the point where parents would pay tutors so their children would be better prepared for this teacher that never smiled, that was not sweet. Like, anyways, that's all to say that therapists might have this reputation, right, of being nice and empathetic and open-minded, and that's not always the case. Like I've seen some therapists abuse their power, which you know it happens. Um, we do see it. I feel that perhaps it can happen more where with population that is more at risk, right? For example, if somebody doesn't speak English, if somebody, and I've seen it, right? So yeah, absolutely. It's something that not because it's a Latinx therapist, it's going to be the right therapist for you. And that's why asking questions, it's so important, like so important.
I love that. And I think a lot of Latino our Latino cultures are very much about like honoring authority figures.
Yes.
Like in my page, I had 44,000 followers in a year in Espanol on Facebook. And people were calling me doctora. And I was like, yo no soy doctora. I'm not,
Yes. Oh, Vanessa, I've said that so many times.
right? And they're calling me doctora. And I'm really, I'm an intuitive. And I do hypnosis, but I have a certificate. I'm not like therapist. And so um, I'm really, we have to learn to question authority. And that's
Yeah, and there's ways
decolonizing.
to do it. It
And
is a
that's, yeah.
colonizing and it's healing and there's different ways to do it, right? Um, this might not be okay, I'm gonna share this. But my dad, I went to the doctor with my dad and he was so and the doctor spoke Spanish.
Mhm.
So the whole conversation was in Spanish. It was a doctor much younger than him, right? And he was like, "Thank you so much, doctor." And excuse me, can I ask you something? And and my dad is like the sweetest and most respectful man there is anyway. But he was apologizing every time he asked the doctor a question. And I couldn't have, I exploded, Vanessa. So I was like, doctor, I have this list of questions. I'm not gonna apologize for it because I know this is you're here to support us. So are you ready? I'm gonna ask you 15 questions without apologizing. Right. And my dad's face was like, whoa, I don't think he liked that very much, but yeah, it's how can we know that not because they're doctors, not because they're lawyers, not because they're whatever it is, um, that's going to be the barrier for us to do what we need to say. And Vanessa, as so I've worked in community mental health settings, and I was a translator many times because, well, I'm telling you, like I'm talking 9 years ago, before my oldest daughter was born, there wasn't any, like all the free translation through the phone that we have. So man, I cannot tell you how many times, Vanessa, I was talking to the client, the patient, and they were like, Dulce, I haven't taken my meds for like 2 months and they're not doing anything. And I hate how that make me feel. So we went to see the psychiatrist and the doctor asked them through me, are you taking your medication? Yes, doctor, I am. Are you liking it? Absolutely. It's working wonderfully, right? And I was like, no, you have to tell say what's happening.
Yes.
But it's such a cultural thing.
Yes. I'm really glad that we're talking about it because maybe some younger generations are not suffering this. Maybe they've inherited it or listening, but definitely anybody like over 40 who's dealing or 35 dealing with a parent. And I would say that even like my husband is Turkish and Kurdish who questions systems and governments and politics. He's always like, I'll go, what happened? Well, the doctor said. And I'm like, no. The doctor wanted to put him diabetes medicine. I go, why? He goes, because I tested a little high in the sugar. And I'm like, no, you ate white bread, you ate white rice, you ate this. We're going to change your diet. Then you're going to go, you're going to tell him no. He's like, well, but the doctor, no. I'm like, no. So we changed the diet and he went back, he did the blood work and he was fine. And I was like, we need to question. And I've questioned, and I question, like my mom questions too. She questioned a lot because of my brother who was born with a heart condition. But then there were moments when she didn't, so it's confusing. When she was in
Yeah.
guerrilla mode, when she was in like warrior mode to
Mm,
defend her son and find out the details. But for herself, towards the end of her life, she was going along with things that really were not good for her at the end of it. So we
yeah,
have to stay aware. I think that anybody listening, like having compassion for our family members,
absolutely.
who are Latino and we're Latinos too, but I mean, they came up in a different world maybe where you had to apologize and it's like colonizer, like they have more education, they know better. But we need to ask questions because everybody's human, everybody's fallible, you know?
And not to think about it as good or bad, right? Because it's their experience. So I feel that labeling it, it's part of the issue too. And I would say compassion and self-compassion. because I do that in other places.
Right.
So perhaps for me, it is easier to do that with a doctor, but it might not be as easy when I am part of this group of amazing Latinas and I was invited and I'm feeling like an imposter and I don't agree with everything they're saying, but I don't say anything, right?
Right.
So
You're so right.
I feel that it's also important to keep in mind that we might be doing the same in different spaces and it's hard for us to change it, right? So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I love that. I love that. Like if you're in a class and you don't understand, ask questions anyway.
yeah,
Don't just nod. Don't just nod and act like you understand. Ask the questions. It's so true. It's so true. And it only creates more and more harm like, when we don't tell the truth because it builds up and we could feel more of an imposter because we're not telling the truth, right? So well, I have a couple of different things that I want to ask you because I think we've had a really good conversation. Pero hay tanto, ¿no? Because I think it's a very deep, juicy topic and experience for us. I tell a lot of my clients who come for readings and come for hypnosis to go to therapy.
mm,
I tell a lot of them, and why I tell them because hypnosis, the way I do it with a protocol that I created, it might create a big shift. Like I had somebody who, for 47 years, every time she talks about her dad, she cries.
mm,
She's in her late 60s. She's been to therapy, it still continues. We did one session, she stopped, right? Sometimes it can happen that fast with hypnosis, you're going to the subconscious. So that's an example. But somebody else will come to me and then something shifts really fast in two, three, four sessions of hypnosis. The thing is, they still have to unpack things,
yeah,
right? Like, and there's still new things that are going to come. Like, just because we've maybe integrated a trauma or have learned how to look at it differently, or now are proceeding differently or creating a new habit, doesn't mean that we don't need someone to validate, to support, to give us a bigger perspective, to give us tools to manage different areas of our life. Because I think, what I tell them too is like, it's a lot to put on your partner to think that your partner or your mother or your father or your sister has to be everything for you. I think
yes,
that I don't know if everybody, but I think some Latinos like expect their family members to be their therapists, because we're kind, we listen, but that's too much. It's not their wheelhouse.
yeah,
They could be intuitive, they could be loving, they could be beautiful, but it's also important to get an objective point of view.
yeah,
What are some, and so I always encourage them, I'm like, this is a journey. Like, it's not going to be a hypnosis session or two or three. It's not a past life regression. It's not just a reading. Like, these things will shed light, but you still have to dig deeper in a consistent manner and then manage the change as you create a new life. So I always tell people to go to therapy. What are some benefits you think for everyone, but specifically for Latinos and Latinx immigrants to go to therapy? What are some of the benefits?
um so one of the things I see a lot is issues with the serving, right? Like feeling like we don't deserve whatever it is. And therapy can be that space where you explore that, right? And Vanessa, I love what you said about family because familismo is such a huge value for so many Latinx families, where it can also feel like it could feel like you're a traitor if you're talking or exposing things about your family that are not good, that
Hmm.
have not been good, patterns that you can recognize, and yet you don't know how to break, right? So therapy can provide you with the space to talk about that, hopefully in a space where you don't feel judged, where you feel that you can do it safely. And most likely, even by talking about it, you're already gonna feel a certain way. But I feel that's a huge benefit, right? Another thing that I see often with the people I work with, it's a lot of guilt that can be connected to this the serving, right? If you have more, the guilt might be because you have more, or the guilt about feeling guilty about not doing as much as you would like. So a lot of guilt that it's also another way for us to talk, another like a safe space to talk about it. And it can also be, Vanessa, I feel, a space to talk about all these barriers that you you have as Latinx, right? Whether it's not being promoted, feeling like, if you're the only Latina in your team, a lot of the people I work with, we do talk about work a lot because even though the title might look awesome, and from the outside, everything can seem so quote unquote successful, they feel horrible or they feel that they haven't reached their full potential because nobody has opened them that door, right? So I feel that with the Latinx community, and I know what I'm going to say might be controversial or might sound not so nice for some people, but I feel that um, the competency, like that the scarcity mindset and the feeling like we need to compete and there's only so many doors. Unfortunately, sometimes there's not support within ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And that can create so many feelings, resentment, frustration. So talking about that in an environment where you don't feel that you're putting your whole professional career at risk, might be hard to find. And therapy can be that space for people.
I love that so much. It's so true. I remember in New York, somebody told me about quítate tú para ponerme yo. Let me
Oh,
take you out. So I put myself in.
literally?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because it was happening. I mean, they didn't tell me that to my face, but it was happening. And I'm
but
like,
that
well,
was a message.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was like, because there was a time where, and still, I think it still is, where
Yes.
Latinas allowed. Like I remember I was brought on to a big, big spiritual, like the first women's spirituality thing event. And I helped run it in 2007 in New York City. And I wanted to bring Afro Latina in. And they're like, well, we have you, we're good, you know? So, that's how it goes.
Mm,
And and still, to be honest with you, I mean, I don't want to call anything out, but even in the spirituality and wellness industry, it's still a marketing thing.
mhm.
And if you know people or were successful in another arena, they will put you on, even if there's somebody who's got 30 years of experience on you. Do you know what I mean? These are things that just happen. And so
Yeah.
for me, like having therapy to be able to understand, like I don't want to run and compete with all that, that being somebody who's actually supported myself in my work, because sometimes people are interviewed on TV, but they don't support themselves from their work. And this is also something we need to understand when we're looking at media and looking at things, or people might have a book, which is amazing and phenomenal, but that doesn't mean they support themselves from their work.
Yeah.
It's a different impact. Book is great. It'll impact people in a certain way. But then even as like business owners, because you're talking about professional Latinas like probably in corporate and like that, I'm talking from the end of being an entrepreneur online, right?
Yeah.
Full time now, going into 13 years next year. Then the things I've had to navigate to make six figures and more. I lived alone in New York, right? So I had to make that money. There wasn't a husband paying for it. Even now, there isn't. So the stressors that come with working and doing the hours of work rather than just putting on a pretty dress and going to network, right?
Yeah.
Like I sometimes I've had to choose before going to network in an event, but I was like, no, but I have to do these sessions because I have to pay the bills. This was like years ago. And so having a good therapist who can understand that when even and I'm talking to because I know that some of my people are corporate, some people are very successful therapists, lawyers, but there's also a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this podcast.
Yes.
We live in a weird world.
Yeah.
A lot of fake people. Like my husband told me he was dating that everybody was the founder of this and everybody was the founder of that. But then he found out they didn't have jobs, they didn't work, right? Because Vanessa, they live with their parents and they didn't really, they were like 40 something year old women. And I don't want to down them because maybe they were faking it till they made it. But he goes, but you never called yourself the founder of anything. You just said I have an online business. He goes, and then it was like, yeah, you really actually paid for everything out of you, like you support yourself fully. And so the pressure of supporting yourself fully from your own business when so many people present as if they do, but they actually don't, is very stressful for somebody who sometimes doesn't have the same oportunidades, like opportunities. Thankfully, I'm so good with that now and I integrated it, but like years ago, it was very painful to see just somebody who knew somebody and it's I'm not talking just the Latinx wellness. I'm talking about white,
Yeah.
the biggest one. They just knew somebody and then they got on like got a book deal. They got something, and you're like sitting there going, oh my God, estoy trabajando todos los días. Um, it can make you feel invisible. So I suggest to anybody who's also having their own business and having to support themselves because a lot of people play at business. They're like, and it's okay. You do business your way. For you, it could be your part-time. It could be your side gig. Because for me, it was for years, right? It could be your way of life. Like I used to do things for free. But when life and spirit told me you got to go full time, there's a level of stress to having to make and your own business that's not traditional because therapy is still a traditional, right, pathway. So people understand what they're getting into. But anybody who's creating like a coaching business, spirituality, wellness, healing, and different it's a lot of stress. So
Mhm.
let's get our therapy on, right? So yeah, I just wanted to go into that because I know there's so many of us and we don't talk about it because everybody wants to be like, oh, I'm a millionaire, I'm rich, I make 500,000. Look at my life, look at my beautiful house. People do that kind of thing. And I'm doing great. But there's so much struggle that if I didn't have my therapist and my spiritual practice, I don't know if I would have made 12 years of full-time online, especially starting in the time when I started in 2012, 2013 where people didn't do this really. You know what I mean? I was one of the first. So it just, por favor, ayúdense.
Mm.
It's not, you need more than a reading, you need more than a hypnosis here and there. Breath work is amazing. All those things are great, but I think it's also great to add therapy to our self-care. Before I ramble on too much myself, I wanted to ask you, Dulce, was there an ancestral pattern that you had to transform or heal in order to be who you are today?
Oh, I think I'm still transforming and healing it, Vanessa, but um I think there's a few. One is the not enoughness, right? Feeling like I am enough. Um, and with that, feeling that because I am enough, I deserve things, right? Um, those two are very present. And because I am enough, I can accept myself as I am, with the gifts that I have, with the imperfections that I have. But I'm still, and I feel that's life, right? It's like an ongoing job. Um, but yeah, I do have a list of
Yeah, we all do, girl. We all do. We're always being challenged. And what are some ancestral gifts that you're leaning into?
Yeah, so I'm leaning more towards intuitive, spiritual gifts, working with energy. And I do feel, Vanessa, that the people that work with me are naturally attracted and open to this. But so far, I've been incorporating some of the energy work in my sessions, but not too publicly. So I wanted to start working with that more because it's been so healing for me and it's been such a huge complement to traditional therapy, right? So I wanted to officially work with that a little more, especially during the fall. I do think that the fall can be, and one of the reasons why, and please, yeah, I know we've been talking for a while, so feel free
Oh,
to
it's so
cut me
good.
up
It's good.
whenever, but
Go ahead.
I do feel that because of everything that we've talked about here, as much as I love and I look forward for Hispanic Heritage Month, it can be a lot. In December, there's all these like end of year events. Here, there's the Massachusetts Women Conference, which is huge. Like this year, it's Oprah's gonna come. And Vanessa, I'm wipe. Like by December, I'm like, no, thank you. I don't have the energy to network, to do anything. And after kind of like, thinking about it, I realized that I do spend a lot of energy during September, October because there's so much expectation because of the um, superficiality of going to places, just talking about what's working and how everything is great, which I understand. Like, I understand that you do need to sell what you do, but I do feel that we need spaces where we can talk about how we're having such a hard time with fill in the blank, right? Where we can be vulnerable, where we can talk real talk. And Yeah, so I do think that that combined, I live in Massachusetts, days get shorter, like there might be this expectations, or you might be reminiscent about all the things you wanted to do this year that you didn't accomplish, like so many things that can happen at this time of the year, right? So yeah, I wanted to start new offerings this fall, incorporating hopefully some of those gifts.
I love that. What are some of the energetic tools that you work with?
Yeah, so I feel that they're not super big, especially for you, Vanessa, but some of the ones I work with, I feel like just it starts out with recognizing energy
Hmm.
because we forget, right? Like we forget about, okay, so how does energy feels for you? When we talked about energy, what does that mean? Because our default is to do, perform, perform, perform. So I feel that, especially for those people that are very academic, it can feel hard to recognize what are we talking about. So I do think that it starts with something as simple as that. I love to start when I work in person and even online to start by inviting people to, is there anything you can do to get more comfortable,
Right.
right? To be within your body. So
Yeah, you're
connecting with
bringing them
your
into their body.
body.
You're grounding.
Yeah,
Love this. I love this.
because it can be so weird for people when you ask them that in a conference. I'm like, if you want to take your shoes off, go for it. What can you do? But how can you protect your energy? So, something I do with my daughters when we start our day is to create our energy bubble, right? And that's a tool that I share with some of the people I work with. Starting by I do have a certification working with angels, so connecting with your angels, if that's something that serves you, right? That's the other thing. Like there's some of these tools, like everything are not going to be aligned with what you believe in. Some others will. So I feel that it's my main thing is, can we create space for different perspective and
Yeah,
figured out which ones of those perspective are going to be helpful for you.
so beautiful. Oh my God, thank you so much, Dulce. I loved having this conversation with you. Thank you for sharing so much. How do people find you? ¿Cómo te encuentran?
Thank you, Vanessa. So I'm in, my website is dulceorozco.com, and I am in LinkedIn and Instagram as Latina Immigrant Therapist altogether. And thank you for um, giving me this opportunity. Vanessa, you invited me a while ago, and I was like, "Ah, I don't know if I'm ready. Like, I'm still like not." out of the spiritual closet yet. Not that I'm like completely out, but thank you for trusting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk about this part of my life a little bit more. I appreciate it and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. You're so welcome. La verdad que you have such a beautiful energy. Everybody should have a therapist like you, Latina immigrant therapist, because you're just so loving, so honest, so clear, so grounded, and I love having you here. And please come back in the future too. As we know, we all keep growing. We have different ways of expressing, and it is hard, right? When we first start to talk about things that we're not used to talking about. I've been there.
Mhm.
But then we do it and it gets a little easier. So gracias, Dulce, for being with us. Thank you so much, folks. Por favor, follow Dulce Orozco, Latina immigrant therapist. She's amazing. And seguimos adelante, mi gente. Bye bye. Bye, Dulce.
Bye, Vanessa. Thank you.